A Watchful Path by Tony Angelo. The dust of the country roads still coats my boots, a fine ochre film that clings like memory. It's been 10 years now since Sarah and I packed our scant belongings and our 2 young children into a borrowed wagon and turned our backs on the confined, smoke-choked city streets. 10 years since we traded the open running sores of the ghetto for what we believed would be the healing balm of the country. Our little parcel, a quarter-acre with a broken-down 2-room house we'd bought sight unseen and pinched pennies, was heaven. A place where my children, Thomas and Lily, could breathe air not filtered with soot, where their laughter could ring out without being swallowed up by tenement walls. We called it a new start, a fresh start, and in many ways it was. The sun rose over fields of corn and cotton, not factory smokestacks. The nighttime silence was deep, almost sacred, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. But that silence, I soon learned, was a deceptive thing. It concealed another kind of menace, a subtle toxin that seeped into the fabric of daily existence, just as insidious as the bare dangers we'd fled. The first bite was economic. We'd had the notion that hard work, honest sweat would be our coin. And it was to a point. But the jobs, the good work at the local mill or the larger farms, seemed to always slip through our fingers. New faces, men and women from countries I couldn't even name, with accents as thick as molasses, were favored. They were white, yes, but as poor as we were, fleeing their own tyrannies and famines. And yet they were offered a rung on the ladder we were still waiting to reach. I saw it in the hiring hall, the foreman's weary sighs when I approached, the dismissive wave of the hand. And the next day, another fresh-faced Irish kid or Italian with fear and resolve in his eyes would come forward with a shovel and a day's wages. It was not always active hate, no. Sometimes it was just the easy way, the path of least resistance for the powerful. And it left us, the folks who'd been here, who'd built this nation with our blood and sweat, scrabbling at the leavings. We managed. I worked odd jobs, mended fences, gave a hand during harvest when I could, always lower wages, always grateful for what I could get. Sarah did washing for the white families in town, her hands red and raw, her back aching from the endless scrubbing. We built our life brick by painful brick, each one put in place with hope and silent prayer. And then there were the other threats, the ones whispered about after church service, the shadows at the perimeter of our quiet lives. It started small, a window on a neighbor's house, broken mysteriously. A fresh set of tire tracks up to a friend's porch, then circling back around, a message unspoken but glacially clear. My own moment arrived on a Tuesday, trudging home from a week's toil clearing a new timber patch. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fiery brushstrokes of purple and orange. I was tired, my body aching, but my heart lifted by the promise of Sarah's cooking and Lily's arms. That's when I heard it, the noise in the underbrush, too weighty for a rabbit, too deliberate for the wind. I picked up my pace, my heart thudding against my ribs like a bird in a cage. The footsteps behind me grew bolder, closer. I didn't look back. I just ran until my lungs were burning, until the small glimmering light of our home twinkled in the distance. I wrenched the door open, breath shattered, sweat freezing to ice on my skin. Sarah, startled, saw the fear in my eyes and knew. No words were needed. It had occurred before. It would occur again. Our tiny, unassuming houses became strongholds. We learned to shut windows not just against the wind, but against hands that would intrude. We slept with one eye open, our ears acutely sensitive to the orchestra of night. And then there were the dogs. They were just dogs to begin with. Every home, every farm had one or two. A shepherd mutt, a hound gaunt from hunting, a yapping terrier. They'd bark at the mailman, at stray cats, at kids playing tag in the dirt streets. But when the dark tides of threat began to rise, I noticed a difference. It wasn't every bark. They weren't the joyful bark of a dog chasing a squirrel, or the complaining growl at a wagon going by. No, these were different. They started subtly. A low, throaty growl from Old Man Hemlock's hound, a sound you could almost feel in your bones. Then a high, frantic series of yaps from the Johnson's terrier, a wild, nearly hysterical din. They weren't barking at anything they could see, not at the moon, not at the rustling leaves. They were barking at something unseen, something that moved on the edge of our perception. I started to pay attention. The low growl, I learned, meant someone was on the road, approaching us slowly. The short staccato barks, usually from more than one dog, meant they had left the road, were cutting across the fields, closing in on our small cluster of houses. And the noise that was truly, truly terrifying, the one that made my skin crawl, was a cacophony. A chorus of barks, low and threatening, wavering through the quiet night from one end of our lane to the other. That was a signal they were here, right outside, or worse, just beyond the tree line, waiting. One night the chorus erupted. It was a cold, moonless night. The dogs yapped, howled, growled, a mad, despairing warning. I cradled the old hunting rifle Sarah's father had left behind, the chill weight of it comforting in my arms. Sarah herded the children into the corner of the bedroom, praying softly. I inched to the window, peered through a crack in the curtains. Shadows. Dark, shapeless masses stirring through the vegetable garden, a glint of metal in the faint moonlight. A boot scraped on the wooden steps of the porch. My heart racing, I racked the rifle, and the noise resounded through the oppressive silence. The shadows stopped. Then, slowly, they retreated and blended back into the darkness. The dogs continued their frenzied protest for a while before settling into a low, suspicious growl. My hands trembled as I put down the rifle. They had been attempting to get inside. The fear was a constant companion, a silent passenger in our lives. It was another kind of fear than the city, where danger generally announced itself with a yell or the firing of a pistol. Here it was subtle, a serpent in the grass. It poisoned the peace we had sought. My sister Clara visited that summer, fleeing the steamy tenements of Harlem. She gazed about our little house with its garden spot and the fields rolling away to the horizon, her eyes wide in a mix of envy and pity. "Elijah," she said, fanning herself with a crumpled newspaper, "you truly have found your paradise out here. Look at this space, the quiet. No more sirens wailing, no more drunks on the stoop, no more gangs fighting over turf in the alleyways. You've truly made it." I gazed at her city-shiny clothing, her tired but wary eyes that spoke the story of constant, overt conflict. "Clara, it ain't all paradise. The quiet, it got its own kind of danger. It just don't shout so loud." She waved her hand to dismiss him. "Danger? What danger? Some wild animal? Come on, Elijah. You ain't got nothing like we got dangers. You got air, your own land. That's a king's life to a third-floor walk-up with rats as big as cats and people doing anything for a nickel." I tried to explain the immigrants who were stealing our jobs, the unseen hands that tried to push their way into our homes, the fear that churned in our guts whenever the dogs began their particular persistent barks. I explained being followed home, the terror of not knowing why or by whom. She just shook her head. "That's just life, Elijah. Everyone everywhere has problems. But here it's cleaner. Your problems here, they seem softer, like a gentle breeze, not the storm that rages through our streets every night." Her words stung. She couldn't see past the surface, the majestic lifestyle of open space and a small, owned home. She didn't understand that a gentle breeze could still be carrying the seeds of poison, and that unseen dangers, just because they were unseen, could be all the more terrible. The hurricane she spoke of, at least it announced itself. Here, the storm brewed quietly, announced only by the frantic cries of animals. The dogs have been our sentinels, our living alarm system. I learned to know the different tones in their barks. The distant, almost mournful howl of one dog in the dead of night generally meant a scout, someone who was observing from afar. The more piercing, persistent barks from several dogs signaled that they were moving, closing in. And the truly terrifying, full-throated roar, a chorus of angry, fearful warnings that echoed from every direction. That was the signal for imminent danger. That meant it was time to grab our loved ones, grab our weapon, and pray. One late autumn night, the air brittle with the promise of winter, the dogs began. It started with a low, despairing whine from Mrs. Johnson's terrier, followed by frantic, panicky yips. Old Man Hemlock's hound, usually so staid, let out a low, chesty growl that vibrated through the floorboards. Soon, it was a regular chorus of fear. It seemed that every dog in our small town, and some from surrounding areas as well, participated, their yips and barks intermingling, forming a wall of noise that was pure, unmitigated fear. This was no scout. This was no small group. This was a bigger, more organized threat. I could feel it in the air itself, a chill that had nothing to do with the falling temperature. My palms were slick with sweat as I chambered a round into the rifle. Sarah, ever the stoic, gathered up the children and my shotgun, which she knew how to use if necessary. "They're coming, Elijah," she whispered, her voice tight with fear but her eyes unwavering. "They ain't just hunting us tonight. It's everyone." I looked out, the darkness complete. The barking was now a cacophony, a crazed crescendo. I saw lights, faint and flickering, making their way slowly down the main road towards our lane. Torches, and behind them, shapes too many to count. This was it. Then, over the noise of the warning barks, I heard something else, a sharp, loud whistle. 3 short tweets, too long. Not the sound of the mob's approach. Another call, one I'd heard before, a local farmer's call to his sheepdogs. But why now? Then, through the slats in the fence line, I spotted them. Not the mob, but other dark shapes, moving with intent. My immediate neighbors, the Greens, the Johnsons, Mr. Silas from down the street, all armed, taking positions to intercept the approaching mob at a different location. We had all learned the language of the dogs, deciphered the urgency in their barks. We were already forming an unspoken coalition. But then I noticed another movement. A figure detached itself from our small group, walking to the absolute front, toward the oncoming torches. It was a man I knew, but barely knew, Tomas. He was an Italian immigrant, a recent arrival, who lived with his family on the edge of the white settlement near our own. Kept to himself, worked hard, and often seemed cold, his eyes suspicious, guarded. We'd always seen his family as part of the new wave getting jobs over us, a quiet source of our economic struggle. Tonight, though, Thomas was no contender. He held a heavy wooden club, and his face, illuminated briefly by the flickering torchlight of the advancing mob, was contorted in a fury I knew well. He was shouting something in his own tongue, a fierce, outraged flow of words, as he stood directly in the path of the lead torchbearer. The mob paused, caught off guard by this unexpected resistance. Tomas was not alone. His older sons, strapping and tall, emerged from the darkness behind him, stood shoulder to shoulder with their father, confronting the charging mob. "They ain't just after you, Reed," Tomas yelled, his voice louder than one would have anticipated, carrying over the barks and the noise. He switched to broken English, his accent heavy but his meaning clear. "They come for anyone who ain't right in their eyes. Today you, tomorrow us. We stand." The mob, caught off guard by the joined, unanticipated resistance of 2 groups of people they viewed as lesser than themselves, hesitated. Our small group of African-American men and women, rifles and shotguns held steady, emerged from the shadows behind Tomas and his sons. The unexpected front gave them pause. They had hoped for easy targets, not a unified front. Amid curses and threats spoken, the torches began to recede, their menacing light disappearing into the night. The dogs, one by one, quieted, their barks fading to cautious growls, and then to a collective, relieved sigh of panting. The silence that followed was different from the pre-raid quiet. It was a silence with new consciousness. I glanced at Tomas, his chest heaving, his face still in a scowl. He glanced at me, and for the first time, there was no suspicion, no rivalry, only a shared exhaustion and a silent understanding. "Thank you, Tomas," I rasped. He nodded, a quick, almost embarrassed gesture. "We all gotta live, Reed. They make it hard on everybody." The majestic lifestyle my sister envied wasn't an issue of the size of space, but the unconquerable spirit of the individuals who fought for it. It was not easy. It was replete with unseen dangers, with economic biases pitting us against fellow strugglers, with the constant threat of violence, announced by the ancient voice of dogs. And yet in that moment, beneath the vast, indifferent sky, I recognized it held also the promise of an unlikely solidarity. The new-made friends forged in the fire of shared risk, the unfamiliar hands reached out in the darkest hour. The dogs still barked, a suspicious chorus, but now I knew that some of those barks weren't just threat warnings, but a call to the collective strength of a community slowly, painfully getting on its feet. And that, I knew, was another kind of majesty.